It all started with a phone call that I didn't see coming, the kind of call where the tone alone tells you something's off before the words even hit your ear. My sister, excited and nervous about her upcoming wedding, had been keeping me updated on every little detail, the flowers, the seating chart, the food tastings. We laughed about how chaotic it all was, and I truly thought I was a part of the inner circle of her planning. But then her voice shifted. There was a pause, a hesitation, like she was rehearsing something in her mind before she let it out. That's when she said it. "I'm sorry, but your daughter can't come to the wedding. She's too young." At first, I thought I'd misheard her. Too young? My daughter is 17 years old. 17 is not a child. 17 is right on the edge of adulthood, someone who can drive, hold a job, apply for college, make decisions about her future. Too young? For what? To sit at a table, eat a meal, watch her aunt get married? My mind started racing as I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe she was joking, maybe she meant something else. But no, she doubled down. We want an adult-only atmosphere. No kids, no teens. Just adults. Her words hit me like a punch in the chest. The same sister who had watched my daughter grow up, who had held her as a baby, who had cheered for her at school plays, was now categorizing her as unworthy of attending the most important day in her life. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the dismissal, the casual way she said it, as though my child wasn't important enough to be present. I felt the blood rush to my face as I tried to process the level of disrespect hidden behind what she framed as a simple boundary. I remember gripping the phone tighter, staring at the wall like it could somehow give me answers. My sister kept talking, explaining her reasons, throwing out words like vibe and mature setting, as if a wedding was a nightclub or a secret society. I wanted to interrupt, to ask her how she could draw a line that cut my daughter out but allowed distant cousins and plus ones she barely knew in. How could she justify inviting people who meant little to her life but banning someone who had been by her side since the beginning? As she spoke, flashes of memories came back to me. My daughter as a flower girl at another family wedding, walking carefully down the aisle, clutching petals in her tiny hand. The countless birthdays where my sister showed up with gifts and hugs, promising that family always came first. The graduation ceremonies, the milestones, the way she always said, "She's growing into such a wonderful young woman." And now suddenly, this same girl was too young to be part of her big day. It felt like betrayal in its rawest form. I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach, the way my heart broke for my daughter even before she knew. I pictured having to look her in the eyes and explain that her own aunt didn't think she belonged. How could I even begin to prepare her for that kind of hurt? This wasn't just about missing a party, it was about being told she wasn't valued, that she didn't measure up, that she didn't matter in the moments that mattered most. And let me be honest, anger rose in me just as fast as sadness. Because the truth is, I knew what this was really about. It wasn't about age, it wasn't about rules. It was about control. My sister wanted her wedding to reflect her vision, and in that vision, she was willing to erase people who didn't fit her picture. And I wasn't naive, I knew my daughter was paying the price for that. I listened, I bit my tongue, I tried to remain calm, but the whole time my mind was screaming. How dare she? How dare she reduce my child to a number, as if 17 years of love, growth, and presence didn't matter? How dare she ignore the fact that family isn't about convenience or aesthetics, it's about showing up for one another, no matter what. That phone call was supposed to be just another update in the chaos of wedding planning, but it became the moment everything shifted. It was the shocking, gut-wrenching moment when I realized that the battle wasn't about a seat at a wedding, it was about respect, dignity, and the message I was going to allow my daughter to receive. When I finally broke the news to my daughter, I could see the light drain from her face in real time. It's one of those moments you never forget as a parent, the way disappointment can settle into your child's eyes like a shadow you can't erase. I had rehearsed the words in my head, hoping to soften the blow, but there was no way to dress it up, no way to make it sound less cruel. Her aunt, someone she loved and admired, had decided she didn't belong at the wedding. The moment the words left my mouth, she just froze. At first she laughed, a nervous kind of laugh, as though I was joking. But when she realized I wasn't, when she saw the heaviness in my voice and the way I couldn't look her in the eye, the laughter stopped. Her smile disappeared, and I watched confusion flicker into disbelief, then disbelief harden into pain. She sat there silent, staring down at her hands like maybe if she stared long enough, she could make sense of it. "Why me?" she whispered. That question cut me deeper than anything else. Because what was I supposed to say? That she was too young? That a number, 17, had suddenly made her invisible to her own family? How do you explain to a teenager, standing on the edge of adulthood, that she's old enough to take on responsibility, to face the world, but apparently not old enough to sit at a wedding table? I could see the way she started questioning herself in that instant. That's what hurt the most. She wasn't just upset about missing the event, she was internalizing the rejection. You could see it in her posture, in the way she slouched, in the way her voice got quiet. It wasn't about the wedding anymore, it was about her worth. She began asking things like, "Am I not mature enough? Did I do something wrong? Does she not like me?" Questions no child should ever have to ask about their own family. I tried to reassure her, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. How do you comfort someone when you yourself are still reeling from the same wound? I thought back to all the times my daughter had been there for my sister. Every family barbecue where she helped set the table, every holiday where she sat patiently with the younger cousins, every babysitting favor she did without complaint. She had been the dependable one, the kind-hearted one, the one who never asked for much in return. And now, when it was time to include her, she was the one cast aside. My daughter remembered those moments too, and I could tell they were running through her mind like a highlight reel of betrayal. The sting wasn't just being left out of a wedding, it was being left out by someone she had given so much of herself to. As a parent, you want to shield your child from this kind of pain. You want to tell them that the world is fair, that family has their back, that love is unconditional. But in that moment, I couldn't lie. I couldn't look her in the eye and promise her those things, because her own aunt had just proven otherwise. What I could do was sit there with her, hold her hand, and let her cry. And she did cry, not the loud, dramatic sobs of a child, but the quiet, controlled tears of someone trying to hold it together. That broke me even more, because it showed me just how much she had already been forced to grow up. I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. Guilt that I had delivered the message, guilt that I couldn't protect her from hearing it, guilt that somehow I had let her down by being caught in the middle. I wanted to march back to my sister and demand answers, but at the same time I knew nothing she could say would undo the damage already done. My daughter had heard the verdict loud and clear, and it was going to echo in her mind long after the wedding day passed. She tried to put on a brave face after the tears slowed, saying things like, "It's okay, I didn't really want to go anyway, but I knew better." I knew those words were just armor, a thin shield she was trying to build to protect herself. Deep down, she did want to be there. She wanted to see her aunt walk down the aisle, to be part of the celebration, to feel like family. And being denied that wasn't something she could brush off with a casual shrug. It was something that was going to sit with her, maybe even shape the way she saw her place in the family. Watching her go through that pain lit a fire in me. It wasn't just about defending her anymore, it was about making sure she knew her value wasn't dictated by anyone else's opinion, not even family. Because if she walked away from this thinking she was less, then I had failed her as a parent. And in that moment, I knew something had to change. What made the whole situation sting even more was the glaring double standard that stared me right in the face. My daughter was told she couldn't come because she was too young, yet somehow that same rule didn't apply to everyone else. As the guest list started circulating through family chatter and social media posts, I couldn't help but notice the names. People I barely knew, people my sister hadn't spoken to in years, distant relatives from states away who had never made the effort to show up to a birthday or graduation, they were all welcomed with open arms. Some of them were bringing plus ones who my sister had never even met before, yet they were still invited, celebrated, and even given prime seats at the reception. Strangers to her life, but apparently more deserving of a place at her wedding than my daughter. That hypocrisy gnawed at me. It wasn't just a matter of rules are rules. If she had truly wanted an adults-only wedding, fine, I could have respected consistency. But this wasn't about consistency, it was about convenience and appearances. My daughter was 17, on the cusp of being legally an adult, yet she was pushed out while some 20-year-old acquaintance, someone who had no connection to my sister's life other than being someone's date, was being treated as if they belonged more. How does that make sense? How does that not scream insult? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Because this wasn't just about one seat at a table. This was about value. My daughter, who had been there for my sister through thick and thin, who had stood by her during breakups, who had cheered for her promotions, who had always called her auntie with love, was now being measured against strangers and found less worthy. I couldn't help but imagine how my daughter must have processed that part. It wasn't only exclusion, it was being replaced by people who had done nothing to earn their spot. What message does that send to a young girl who's still figuring out her place in the world? That blood ties don't matter? That loyalty and love don't matter? That all it takes to be valued is to fit someone else's idea of what belongs? I replayed conversations in my head where my sister had told me family comes first, where she preached about unity, about sticking together no matter what. All those words rang hollow now. Because when the moment came to prove it, she didn't just break that promise, she shattered it in front of everyone. She welcomed outsiders with open arms while closing the door on her own niece. The optics of it alone were humiliating. Imagine explaining to your daughter that she wasn't welcome, but some guy named Mike, who happened to be a coworker's date, was. Imagine being 17 years old and realizing you weren't considered important enough to share a space that was freely given to people who didn't care about the family at all. And it wasn't only about the guest list, it was about the symbolism. Weddings are supposed to be about family, about unity, about celebrating love and bonds. Yet here was my sister sending the opposite message, that appearances mattered more than people, that optics mattered more than relationships. In her attempt to curate a perfect atmosphere, she revealed just how imperfect her priorities were. My daughter was treated as disposable, an afterthought, someone whose presence might ruin the picture she wanted to paint. That's not just exclusion, that's humiliation. I watched as the news traveled through the family grapevine, and I could see the sideways glances, the whispers. People knew it was wrong, but no one wanted to say anything. It was easier for them to go along with it, to nod politely and talk about how beautiful the venue would be, than to confront the injustice. And so the double standard grew bigger, heavier, and uglier. My daughter was the only one paying the price for a rule that wasn't even real. Everyone else was exempt, everyone else was special enough, everyone else was welcome. The unfairness of it boiled in me. It wasn't just about what my sister had done to my daughter, it was about the precedent it set. If we allow family to treat each other like this, to cast aside the people who matter most while elevating strangers, then what kind of message are we sending to the next generation? What are we teaching them about loyalty, about worth, about love? I knew my daughter was asking herself those same questions silently, and that silence weighed heavier than words ever could. Because behind that silence was the realization that she had been judged, dismissed, and traded out in favor of people who had no history, no love, and no ties to the woman whose wedding she desperately wanted to witness. When the reality of the situation settled in, I found myself standing at a painful crossroads. On one hand, I wanted to keep the peace, to avoid turning my sister's big day into a battleground. Weddings are supposed to be celebrations, moments where joy outweighs conflict, and I knew that any pushback from me would ripple through the family, creating tension that would be hard to ignore. But on the other hand, there was my daughter, hurt, confused, and questioning her worth because of a decision that should never have involved her in the first place. As a parent, my instinct was to protect her, to shield her from harm, to stand up and fight when she couldn't. That instinct was louder than anything else, and it left me torn between two roles, the peacekeeper and the protector. I spent nights lying awake, replaying conversations in my mind, weighing the consequences of each choice. If I stayed silent and went along with my sister's rules, what message would that send to my daughter? That her feelings didn't matter? That she was supposed to swallow disrespect for the sake of appearances? But if I confronted my sister, if I challenged her decision, I risked being painted as selfish, dramatic, or worse, the sibling who ruined the wedding. It was a lose-lose situation, and no matter how I turned it over in my head, the bitterness of the dilemma stayed the same. I tried to imagine myself at that wedding, dressed up, smiling for photos, raising a glass to toast the bride and groom, all while knowing my daughter had been left behind. I pictured her at home, scrolling through pictures of the event on her phone, seeing her cousins dressed up, seeing family she loved gathered together, while she sat alone. That image made my chest tighten with anger and guilt. I couldn't shake it, and I realized that even if I forced myself to go through the motions, the celebration would feel hollow. There's no joy in raising a toast when the person you love most is excluded from the table. The family dynamic added another layer to the conflict. Some relatives urged me to let it go, to avoid making a scene. They reminded me that weddings are stressful, that brides get overwhelmed, that it wasn't worth burning bridges over one day. But those words didn't comfort me, they infuriated me. Because for them, it was just one day. For my daughter, it was a wound that would last far longer. They didn't see the way she avoided eye contact when the subject of the wedding came up, the way she forced a smile when others talked about their outfits or their travel plans. They didn't hear her voice crack late at night when she asked me, "Do I not matter to her?" That wasn't just one day. That was a memory she'd carry, a scar that would shape the way she looked at family. Every fiber of me wanted to shout, to call my sister out for her hypocrisy and her cruelty, but I also knew that doing so would ignite a storm. Weddings have a way of magnifying drama, and I didn't want my daughter to be remembered as the reason behind family conflict. I didn't want her pain to be reduced to gossip, whispered about over champagne glasses. The thought of that made me just as sick as the exclusion itself. So I wrestled with the choice, torn between silence that would crush my daughter and action that could shatter the family. I weighed the cost of each option, not just for me, but for her. At 17, she was already walking that delicate line between childhood and adulthood, already learning what it meant to navigate relationships and respect. And in this moment, what I chose to do would teach her a lesson, whether I wanted it to or not. If I chose peace at her expense, she would learn that silence is the price of harmony, even when you're wronged. If I chose to stand up, she would learn that love sometimes requires sacrifice, even if it comes with consequences. The decision loomed over me like a storm cloud, dark and heavy, threatening to break at any moment. I could feel the tension every time my phone buzzed with a message about wedding plans, every time I looked at my daughter and saw her trying to act like she didn't care. Each interaction reminded me that I couldn't straddle the line forever. At some point, I would have to choose, protect my daughter's dignity or protect the illusion of family unity. And deep down, I already knew which way I was leaning. The turning point came when I finally decided enough was enough. I couldn't sit back and let my daughter carry the weight of being excluded while everyone else pretended nothing was wrong. The anger that had been simmering inside me turned into resolve, and I knew I had to make a decision that would shift the balance. My sister had drawn her line, but I was going to draw mine. The choice wasn't easy, but it was clear. I would not attend the wedding without my daughter. If she wasn't welcome, then neither was I. That was the only way to show her that her worth wasn't negotiable, that I would never allow anyone, even family, to treat her like she was less than. When I told my daughter, she stared at me in disbelief. "You'd really miss the wedding for me?" she asked, her voice soft, almost like she didn't believe she was important enough for such a sacrifice. That question alone broke me, because it revealed just how deeply she had been wounded. She needed proof that she mattered, and I was determined to give it to her. I told her plainly, "You are my family first. If they can't see that, then that's their problem, not yours." I could see the tears well in her eyes, but this time they weren't only from hurt, they were from relief. For the first time since this mess began, she looked like she could breathe again. Of course, my decision didn't sit well with the rest of the family. Word spread quickly, as it always does, and soon my phone was buzzing non-stop with calls and messages. Some relatives tried to guilt me, saying I was overreacting, that I was making the day about me instead of supporting my sister. Others tried to reason with me, insisting it wasn't a big deal, that my daughter would understand one day. But I didn't budge. Because I knew that if I folded, if I gave in to pressure, I would be teaching my daughter the exact opposite of what she needed to learn. She needed to see that her father's love wasn't conditional, that I would choose her every time, no matter the cost. The closer the wedding day got, the more intense the backlash became. My sister herself finally called me, her voice sharp and defensive. She accused me of ruining her vision, of trying to steal attention from her big day. She said things I never thought I'd hear from her, words laced with frustration and entitlement. I let her speak, but when it was my turn, I didn't waver. I told her calmly but firmly, if my daughter isn't welcome, neither am I. Family isn't about convenience, it's about respect. And I won't stand by while my child is disrespected. There was silence on the other end, the kind that feels heavier than shouting. I knew she wasn't expecting me to stand my ground like that. That conversation marked a shift. Suddenly, it wasn't just about a wedding, it was about principles. My sister could decorate her venue with flowers and chandeliers, she could plan the perfect playlist and arrange the perfect seating chart, but none of it would cover the truth. She had chosen appearances over love, control over compassion. And I wasn't going to be complicit in that choice. As the day approached, I felt a mix of sadness and empowerment. Sadness, because this was my sister's wedding, a day I should have been happy to celebrate with her. Empowerment, because I knew I was making the right call for my daughter. The pain of missing out would pass, but the lesson my daughter took away from this would stay with her for life. She would always remember that when someone tried to push her aside, her father stood tall beside her. When family members saw I wasn't backing down, some began to soften. A few even admitted they respected my decision, even if they didn't agree with it. But by then, I wasn't looking for approval. This wasn't about what anyone else thought, it was about keeping my promise to my daughter. I wanted her to see that love isn't proven in words alone, but in actions. And my action was clear: if she wasn't included, then I wasn't going to pretend like everything was okay. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a strange sense of peace. While the rest of the family was rushing to get ready, posting their excitement online, I sat with my daughter at home. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy like before, it was comforting. She knew I had her back, and that was all that mattered to me. And while the wedding unfolded without us, I knew the real statement had already been made. The bold decision had been set in motion, and whether my sister realized it or not, the dynamics of our family would never be the same again. The moment of truth came when the wedding finally unfolded without me or my daughter there, and the ripple effect was undeniable. Word spread quickly through the venue that I had chosen not to attend, and that choice spoke louder than any confrontation could have. The whispers started almost immediately, carried through the tables like wildfire. People who had been quick to dismiss my daughter's exclusion suddenly had to face the reality of what it meant. The empty seats where we should have been sitting weren't just spaces, they were statements. Every glance toward those chairs carried the weight of the choice I had made, and the silence it created in certain corners of the room was deafening. I later heard from family members how the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was subtle, like a curtain being pulled back on an uncomfortable truth no one wanted to acknowledge. Guests who had never questioned my sister's decision before began to murmur among themselves, wondering why a niece, 17 years old, practically an adult, had been barred from attending when strangers filled the room. Some tried to brush it off, but others couldn't hide their unease. The conversation kept circling back to us, to the absence that was impossible to ignore. My sister, of course, tried to keep the spotlight on herself, smiling for the cameras, laughing on cue, dancing with her new husband. But beneath the surface, there was tension. People noticed. Family noticed. And while no one openly challenged her on the day itself, the questions lingered like shadows in every corner of the hall. Why wasn't her niece there? Why had I chosen to stay away? What had happened behind the scenes to cause such a rift? Those questions didn't vanish with the music or the speeches, they stuck. They followed her into conversations long after the reception ended. Meanwhile, back at home, my daughter and I shared something far more powerful than any decorated ballroom could have offered. We sat together, away from the noise, and I could see the way her posture had changed since I told her my decision. She wasn't carrying that same heaviness anymore. She wasn't second-guessing her worth. Instead, there was a calm assurance in her eyes, a newfound confidence that came from knowing she hadn't been left to fight her battle alone. She understood, without me having to spell it out, that she mattered enough for me to take a stand, even if it meant walking away from family tradition. And that, in itself, was the silence that reverberated far beyond the wedding hall. Because when people heard what I had done, they couldn't argue with it. They might have disagreed, they might have gossiped, but deep down, they knew what it represented: loyalty, love, and respect. The kind of respect that doesn't waver under pressure, the kind of love that refuses to be compromised. It wasn't about punishing my sister or stealing attention, it was about proving something to my daughter, and in doing so, reminding everyone else what family should actually mean. The aftermath told the story even louder. Calls came in days later, some from relatives who admitted they had felt uncomfortable the entire night, others from people who said they admired what I did even if they hadn't had the courage to say so in the moment. A few even confessed that they couldn't look my daughter in the eye at future gatherings if they had sat at that wedding silently knowing she was excluded. That silence, the kind that forces people to confront their own choices, became the real legacy of that day. My sister may have thought she was setting the rules, controlling the atmosphere, deciding who belonged and who didn't. But in the end, it wasn't her carefully planned playlist or her floral arrangements that people remembered most. It was the empty seats. It was the quiet absence of the people she pushed out. It was the realization that a young girl had been banned from celebrating with her family, and that her father had refused to let that insult go unanswered. The silence spoke volumes, and it was a silence that lingered long after the music faded, a silence that carried with it respect, clarity, and the unshakable bond between a father and his daughter.